The ideas that gave birth to our nation are the ideas that our nation is resistant to right now, and we should talk about that all the time.
In a world where narratives are shaped by corporations and gatekeepers, independent voices matter more than ever. Badlands Media brings together citizen journalists, researchers, and independent thinkers.
The truth is triggering.
Question the narrative. Explore the facts.
It's authenticity, courage, resilience.
Search for the truth others won't.
It's not about being first or being right.
The information war is changing.
It's about being authentic.
Embrace the friction.
Embrace the friction.
Shut the up.
Authentically antagonizing. Join the movement.
I'm going to say how I feel.
Follow Badlands Media.
This is about the future.
The Badlands. What are the Badlands? Explain those Badlands. That's a hell of a name.
Well, good evening. Welcome to the No Treason podcast, episode 38. Welcome to everyone. We are live, and I see already people sweltering and wilting from summer heat waves. It's actually not too bad where I am in central Illinois, although last week was pretty miserable. Hope everyone can stay cool. You don't have any rolling brownouts or anything to take out your air conditioning. Thank you to Jessica for the new So, since I have been on record saying that is one of the founding documents that is that I would actually hold on to. Counterinsurgent for $5. I've seen them on X in Ashton Forbes mentions. Talking, Ashton Forbes is the guy. He appeared on Baseless Conspiracies with Zach and John, talking about the MH370 missing flight, that if the video that is purported to be Gorgon's Stare surveillance video, top secret classified drone surveillance, if that video is accurate, it very much looks like the U.S. government has figured out a way to teleport objects as large as an airplane. And based on the way the video is described, or what the video shows, it very much looks like field technology. And I had some interesting conversations with Claude about that, in taking the framework of everything that we went through in the Ether series and applying it to how something like teleportation would actually function. And maybe at some point, Polly will come back on and we can kind of go down that rabbit hole. I know he's been kind of poking around in health and water and other aspects that it's all interconnected, because it's all ultimately built off the same first principle, ultimately the terminal principle, God, and then the primordial clay with which he formed everything else, that would be the ether. And so in Counterinsurgent tagged me on X, and I made a comment regarding the ether, and then shortly thereafter, I don't know if it was a result of anything I said, but Ashton Forbes mentioned the ether, and it seems like maybe that type of conversation will become more mainstream, which would be awesome. All right. Last week, we covered section 3 of Lysander Spooner's Science of Justice essay, a section that, if read properly, removes the designation of anarchist from any description of Lysander Spooner and thus myself, because understanding that the only legitimate purpose of a government is to maintain justice by enforcing natural law, that is, to forcibly require people to live honestly, pay what they owe, and hurt no one without just cause, we can then deduce from a first principles basis that mankind must have some form of government. The catch is that any institution calling itself a government can only legitimately operate to that end, and to that end only, that is, enforcing natural law, or else it ceases to be a government and bloats into open despotism. This is because a government, by a natural law definition, is only that which rightfully enforces natural law. By way of stating the most significant principle that, in my mind, I've extracted from Spooner's writings, the qualification of rightly is not something a government obtains because of its collective nature. Rather, rightfully is derived from the rightful authority of each and every individual member within its ranks. Through that lens, legitimate government is merely the amplification of the power of the individual, not the authority. Because the authority of the individual is absolute. However, individuals are weak. Individuals are prone to passions, and although each individual has the right to extract justice from anyone who wrongs them, or even others, they are likely to surge past the natural boundaries of justice in doing so, or just simply be unable to extract the justice that they deserve. Ty's in the chat. Good to see you, brother. For these two reasons, the weakness of the individual and the tendency for zealous overreach, mankind forms governments. And really, it's in the same basic manner as we form other insurance companies or collectives. When Obamacare was rolled out, sane and moral people correctly balked at the notion of being forced to buy insurance. What substantively is the difference between insurance against possible health catastrophes or legal ones? There really is none. And yet we are conditioned to accept the idea that a government may coerce membership within its own ranks, scoff at any attempts to reform it, withhold relative information as to how it operates, and then forcibly exact payment for services that people may or may not want. Services that, under natural law, each individual has the right to refuse. This is why the distinction that Spooner makes between that which is moral and that which is legal is so important. If you view government as simply the executioner authorized to enforce justice in the legal sense, which is an extension of each individual's natural right to resist tyranny and defend their other natural rights, then you won't look to the government to build roads, provide water, award flight routes and airport status to airlines and cities, elevate one scientific theory over others, elevate one religion over others, decide which theory of health is legitimate, provide and regulate education, and on down the list of things that we've come accustomed to government being the sole provider of. But if you conflate the moral and the legal, then you are likely to positively view government as the enforcement arm for your particular cultural convictions. And we're seeing this more starkly now, and certainly at other times throughout human history. People who cannot win a cultural war by using natural means of persuasion or using their freedom of association or freedom of withholding association as a nonviolent means of making their case. They are instead looking to legal enforcement to push their agenda. That's the uniparty, really. They're using the executioner's sword to violently shape the culture from the top down. Not only is this unjust and thus immoral, it is ultimately suicidal. Because as history has shown, once unsheathed and given license to swing arbitrarily, the sword of the executioner cares nothing for the necks on which it falls and swears no allegiance to any one voice. It is as likely to fall on your head the minute your enemies wrest its power from your hands. We covered that aspect of things in the Trial by Jury series. But if all it takes to have the rightful authority is to gain a 51% majority, then we are forever caught in a seesaw of cutthroats fighting to gain the sword and swing it voraciously against the enemy minority. Such is the predictable end of all representative forms of quote-unquote government, or at least a representative government that has lost its touch on what law actually is and where authority is actually derived from, which is why I always ask, representative to what end? How you answer that question reveals your own political philosophy and whether or not you actually believe that legitimate government truly derives its authority from the consent of the governed. Consent, of course, being the authority to say no. Or if it's just a matter of getting a hold of that intoxicating 51%. Tonight, we will discuss Section 4, wherein Spooner expands on the basis for legitimate government, rooted in the science of justice. But first, Badlanders, you are all familiar with Loaded Gun Coffee. They have been longtime supporters of Badlands, and you may have met them in person at GART. But did you know they are a veteran-ran, family-owned shop in Lake Havasu, Arizona? Every bag of their whole bean coffee delivers a high-octane, patriotic punch of flavor. With a long family history of commitment to freedom, every bag is a testament of pride and honor. From the skilled farmers who cultivate each blend to their roasters that hand-pick the finest coffee beans from around the world, Loaded Gun Coffee has mastered their unique brewing methods, resulting in the best tasting coffee around. This coffee is smooth and delicious, the perfect way to start your mornings. Get over to badlandsmedia.tv/loaded and use promo code BADLANDS to get 10% off your order. If you're in the Lake Havasu area, stop in their newly renovated store and say hi. And I'm sure they would also appreciate if you bought some coffee. That is badlandsmedia.tv/loaded, promo code BADLANDS. Stay loaded with Loaded Gun Coffee. And in that series that John has been doing on Sundays, America First Stories, Loaded Gun Coffee is featured on episode 12. Next up, personal anecdote. I mentioned that I see Assad. She's going to have to concentrate on this episode offline on replay. Well, you know what? That's probably a good idea. That being said, we'll miss you in the chat. It was good to see you, and it was wonderful meeting you in person at GART. But a personal anecdote regarding all good products made by our very own Jessica. We have the worst mosquitoes in my backyard. I grew up in northern Minnesota, and we had bad mosquitoes there, and I thought they were the worst there, but we really have mosquitoes from hell here. And for whatever reason, and we did have a colder winter this past year, for whatever reason, which that may have been it, we didn't have mosquitoes really until the last few weeks. And I jokingly said that it was because she had sent me a sample stick of the bug repellent that she sells, and they were just too afraid. And now that they're here, I have been using it, and I can 100% confirm that it does work. And if it's got the citronella smell to it, and it is easy to apply, you don't really need a whole lot. Just kind of dab it on. But yeah, I'm very impressed with it. It is nice to have quality made products that are not toxic. Like, how do we get down that road? That people just take zero effort into figuring out what's in the stuff that they put on or in their body. And maybe that's some of that abdicating personal sovereignty that we need to reclaim. It's not just political, it's also economic. But anyway, make self-care great again this summer with All Good by Jessica Storm. Head outside with All Good's Bug Out Balm full of citronella, eucalyptus, and lavender oils to naturally repel the critters. And tallow sunscreen with non-nano zinc oxide for natural skin protection. No mystery ingredients like in so many commercial products. Just 100% clean, organic ingredients with purpose that work, by the way. And if the sun has your hair feeling a little dry, show it some extra love with the tallow hair mask. A customer favorite for softer, healthier hair after just one use. Everything is handcrafted in small batches by Jessica in Florida with quality and simplicity at the heart of it all. Head over to badlandsmedia.tv/allgood and use promo code Badlands to discount your entire purchase and support the creators at Badlands Media. And then last up, we have the lotion detector.
One hero, one mission to deliver softness to America.
No, Chi-Chi, we can't stop for snacks, dude. We have to deliver all of these soft disclosure gift cards.
He goes by Zach Payne.
The motion detector.
Hey, stop fighting over the beer brush.
Life finds a way.
Hydrate your elbows. Moisturize your soul. Feel the rhythm together. You feel alive and let the lotion roll. Soft disclosure, hear the cry. Maximum softness. Do or die.
Muffin, hit it.
So not only does Soft Disclosure have the absolute best ads ever made, the products are awesome. I was at church this morning and a friend of mine who's also growing out his hair, he's like, "What are you using in your hair?" I was like, "Well, actually, I don't really use hair products. I take the beard oil and I comb it into my hair. And it works better than some nasty product. It smells wonderful and it actually makes my hair look more healthy in person." AOB 22 for $25. Thank you so much. Jay Drake, my Spooner indoctrination is complete. I had to read that like Darth Vader. As I am now including his ideas and conversations with those who think we are to be governed, let alone by a bunch of retards. I love that. Yeah. First principles have a way of doing that to you. They like I said many times, I've crossed the Rubicon with this material a long, long time ago. I understand that it's difficult to uproot your programming and shift it over, but that is very encouraging. And thank you also for the rant. That's very generous of you. Thank you. All right. Section 4, referring back to the freely and voluntarily entered associations of government modeled after insurance companies that were discussed in Section 3. Spooner sets out to answer an objection that someone like the infamous Justice Joseph Story might raise. He writes, "No objection can be made to these voluntary associations," that is basically, what governments should be, "upon the ground that they would lack that knowledge of justice as a science which would be necessary to enable them to maintain justice and themselves avoid doing injustice. Honesty, justice, natural law is usually a very plain and simple matter, easily understood by common minds. Joseph Story would argue that a nation needs a legal priestly class to instruct it as to what the law actually is, which is to say, in actual practice, what the law even should be. It's not like they're arguing that there's some higher standard that they're appealing to. That's something that he brought out in Trial by Jury, that judges have no real rubric for interpreting law other than just their own made-up maxims. Story would say that the people cannot be trusted with the lofty task of discerning what the law is or what the law means. And he explained it as far as why he believed this to be true. Not really, he just stated this as what he believed to be true. In the landmark case that we talked about back during the Trial by Jury series, it was 1834, I believe, maybe 1835, the U.S. versus Batista. And there was a quote from his opinion in there that said, if the jury were at liberty to decide the law for themselves, it would be almost impossible that there should be any certainty in the administration of justice. The law would be as variable as the prejudices, the passions, and the caprices of different juries. In his mind, the people are prejudiced, passionate, and capricious. The people are stupid, or the people are retarded, which they are. But it's kind of funny coming from a man who owed his position as a justice of the Supreme Court to the supposed will of the same people that he thinks are unable to handle the law, through the mechanisms of a government supposedly formed by those same people and sustained by those same people. The same people who are supposedly entrusted to choose from among their own number representatives who gather together to write the very laws that Justice Story must memorize, interpret, and apply. These same representatives, taken from the idiot people that Story has such disdain for, are supposedly thus empowered to elevate certain men like himself to positions of influence and power. If people are prejudiced, passionate, and capricious, which I'm not saying they aren't, but if they are, and are thus incapable of deciding for themselves on a jury what should or shouldn't be a law, then how could they be trusted to select representatives from among their number to create that law and select men like Story to interpret it? The truth is, men like Story and the generations of legal minds in this country that have their heritage in his maxims do not actually believe that their authority is equal to the men that they supposedly serve. They believe instead that they are the gatekeepers of an immutable code that they call the law, only it isn't immutable on purpose. It evolves, and it is safeguarded by their own internal deference through their absolutely most precious maxim, precedent. This, by the way, is another reason to stop viewing elections as a meaningful way in which we can influence the government. If the legal priestly class isn't willing to allow us peasants to have a say on what the law is while impaneled on a jury, then why on earth would they allow us to have a say on whether or how those laws are actually written and who gets to write them? It's no coincidence that laws are written by lawyers, typically, or by corporate legal teams, which are then filtered to Congress through the entire scam of the lobbying system that many people are aware of. It's just we feel like we're kind of powerless to do anything about it, and we keep feeding them politicians to pay off. In theory, elections are fake. And then, of course, the high priests of the legal system then codify it, and then they decree it to us peasants. At no point, really, Does your vote actually make the impact that you are led to believe it does, even if elections are real? Even if you are the one that actually is picking the representative, the way the system is designed and the way it actually functions, going back to Spooner, you can infer the design of a thing by its effect. The way it actually functions, even if elections were real, they don't really want you having a say. So they're going to do whatever they can to make sure you don't have a say, which is why they took down trial by jury so quickly in this country. This whole thing is a thoroughly self-contradictory institution, and men like Justice Story should be viewed for what they really are, wannabe tyrants who shroud themselves in the type of law and pomp that Spooner so delightfully mocked toward the end of the No Treason essay, hoping, successfully so far, that the common man is mesmerized by their theater and hypnotized into complying with a legal system that was devised for their own ruin. Again, you can infer the design of a thing by its effect. And the effect of Story's legal system is to subvert and undermine the very philosophical, moral, and legal foundation this nation declared at its founding. None of this is to say that justices are of no value, or that judges, people who specialize in the law, have no place in a natural law society, because I think they actually do. I would absolutely just, I would love to see a man like Spooner sitting on, if the Supreme Court is something we must have, having a man like Spooner or of his lineage. Like if some Supreme Court justice today, if Thomas or Gorsuch or one of those guys, if they quoted Spooner, I might actually just like ascend into heaven right away. But it is to say that the only thing that separates a judge from an ordinary man is that the judge has merely taken that which is available to every man, and then in theory, they perfected it. They're drawn from the same well of humanity. And at the end of the day, that which they study is no secret. And I see Clairecat saying that rant should be clipped. So clip that. Going back to the essay, and I see Viva Frey just raided the stream. So welcome to him and his compatriots. Thanks for doing that. We're discussing natural law. And let me pull up a different setup there. And we're continuing in section 3. Spooner writes, those who desire to know what it is, that is natural law, in any particular case, seldom have to go far to find it. It is true, it must be learned like any other science, but it is also true that it is very easily learned. I've made this comment before, but when viewed through the modern lens of millions of statutes, it seems impossible that such a statement could be true. How could we possibly know? How could it be so close to us? Because there's millions of laws out there. Like we've talked about, if you have to ask permission to do that which is yours by natural right to do, you're not a free person because of all these statutes and criminality by statute. But when you reflect on what 12 people will unanimously agree should be a law, that list of millions is suddenly destroyed, and the list that is preserved is clearly and intentionally very short. Rocky Top Apologist, good to see you, man. Would we call that a boop if the SCOTUS quoted Spooner? I won't be around to be part of that that discussion of whether or not it's a boop, because like I said, I will have just ascended and will have zero cognizance of any conversation that takes place following. Regarding the list of laws that would actually be preserved, consider firewood geometry. With the story that I've told a number of times regarding my own experience with my city council, or this fire department, all that. Would 12 people all agree that triangular firewood is legal, but rectangular firewood is not? Which is essentially what the law is. It's got to be seasoned and split. You can't use oak, maple, cherry. You can't use any of that stuff because it's rectangular. It went through a planer. Oh, the horror. I mean, you might argue that the spirit of the city ordinance is to prevent people from burning potentially toxic materials, such as treated lumber. And to that, I'd say it's more likely that a 12-person jury would agree that burning toxic materials does pose a threat to the life, liberty, and property of your neighbors, and thus they would impose an injunction on the offender. And that's the kind of thing that it's kind of a gray area. So each community is going to have to decide that. And then this is where you start getting into an understanding of natural law as less a legislative dictum and more of, to Spooner's point, a science experiment of discovering as a community that which leads to peace. Ty for $100, 12 Indie Boy. Thank you, brother. Thanks to @Heartstop, I'm starting my training on the Jade Drake made whip that she gifted us at Deadwood. I'll be sure to send a video of any injury. Wish me luck. That was an awesome, and shout out, yes, again, to Heartstop. She won the raffle and got the whip. And I went over to make sure she didn't lose an ear. And she said that she was going to give it to someone. And the perfect candidate for that was Ty, in her estimation. I wholeheartedly agree. And so we went over there and she gave it to him. And so that was one of my favorite moments from Gart at Deadwood. And please do not hurt yourself. And be sure to apprise the Badlands community of your progress. Back to natural law and its accessibility to the common man. Slide 4. Although it is illimitable in its applications as the infinite relations and dealings of men with each other, it is nevertheless made up of a few simple, elementary principles of truth and justice, of which every ordinary mind has an almost intuitive perception. And almost all men have the same perceptions of what constitutes justice or of what justice requires when they understand alike the facts from which their inferences are to be drawn. I've said this before, but imagine again what courtrooms would be like if a large part of the proceeding involved the respective counsels arguing about the law itself, rather than just accepting it as a given. The result would be a daily and continual discussion, as media reporting would likely amplify that discussion to the larger public. And think about the way the Tyler Robinson case has been, the topic of the chatterboxes on X or other social media platforms. Imagine that kind of coverage, and the instead of viral clips of Jack Posobiec and what's his gay name, Benny Johnson, pulling people's heartstrings. Imagine if you would have viral videos of people talking about, should this even be a law? And those clips are discussing the nature of what rights actually are, what the nature of law actually is. What is justice? What are we trying to find here? Rather than having law be this uncertain thing that story projects it would be, law would be more robust. Because a people perpetually thinking, talking, and deciding about natural law and natural rights would only strengthen its knowledge of both. What do they say? If you don't use it, you lose it. That's probably one of the reasons why the discussion on natural law has basically become a thing of antiquity in regards to American history. Because of men like Story. And then because of the way the legal system has grown like the Borg and has assimilated everything into itself and has punished people for trying to have real conversations. This is the same way that an athlete gets stronger and faster with consistent and intentional training. So imagine a people that had consistent and intentional training just by virtue of the way court cases would transpire. The fear of the capricious and prejudiced and passionate populace would be wholly unfounded at that point. And the reality is that even without that at an institutional level, man is already equipped to opine on natural rights and natural law Because in our daily lives, we are constantly confronted with questions of both as we live and interact with our neighbors. Maybe Cheryl can clip that one too. Spooner writes, the dealings of men with men, their separate possessions and their individual wants, and the disposition of every man to demand and insist upon whatever he believes to be his due, and to resent and resist all invasions of what he believes to be his rights, are continually forcing upon their minds the questions, is this act just? Or is it unjust? Is this thing mine? Or is it his? And these are questions of natural law, questions which, in regard to the great mass of cases, are answered alike by the human mind everywhere. It makes me think of, from Seinfeld, George Costanza, he's like, was that wrong? I never know. I can never really tell. Was that wrong? Most people can tell. This speaks to something I've said before, and borrow from how I've learned to approach ether physics. A wave isn't a thing, but it's what a thing does. So in the same way, society isn't a thing, but it's what people do. It's descriptive. It's descriptive of this exact process at play. The process of discovering, learning, adapting, experimenting with ways, ultimately to achieve peace. Figuring out what natural law is a natural outflow of people freely interacting. Because every single person knows intuitively whether or not they like what's being done to them, if something's being taken from them, if they're being lied to. They all know that's wrong because they don't like it when it's done to them. This goes back to natural law. Ultimately, we distill it down, Spooner does, down to live honestly, and Jesus distills it down to love your neighbor as yourself. Treat others the way you want to be treated. We all know that is the way it should be. We just are very, very good at rationalizing reasons why we shouldn't actually act that way. And then we act shocked when society and culture completely implode, when we act contrary to that standard. This process of figuring out what natural law actually is begins early. You've heard me mention this before, and this is where I get this from. Spooner writes, children learn the fundamental principles of natural law at a very early age. Thinking back to that last quote when he's positing the types of things that are continually forced upon their minds, the questions, is this act just or is it unjust? Is this thing mine or is it his? Some might argue that these are learned behaviors that we pick up as children, forced upon us by social conventions, and argue that it isn't therefore natural. It's just what this particular culture has come up with. But what child needs to be taught to defend mine? Even before they can speak, a toddler will scream and throw a tantrum if that which they are holding, which in their mind they interpret as possession, is taken from them, either by a parent or some other child. No one taught them to not like that. No one taught them to try to defend from that happening. It's natural to them. Exploring a little bit deeper, the argument that children only do this because of external social conventions that are imposed on them. Where did those social conventions come from? Why is it that every people throughout human history have some form of understanding of ownership, of theft, of murder, of honesty? Even those cultures which at the surface level appear to honor deception, like it's okay to lie to someone outside the community or something like that, they still have at their core an understanding of what honesty is. They just might be a little more liberal in their application of it. And that speaks to some of the differences with culture and how these things are actually applied, or to what degree they're being applied. With that as a backdrop, Think about what natural law is described as being. We've covered this a lot. It's patterns of behavior that lead to either war or to peace. In that sense, law, as we typically think of it, really isn't the correct word. It's not boxes we check. It's not a list of rules. It is ultimately relational. It is rooted in humanity. We like to make rules that approximate it because we like order. People who are OCD like it a little more than others. We like to have things neat and tidy. But at the end of the day, toddlers that do not take from each other, who take turns, who are gentle with each other, who are peaceful, they're happy, and they're safe. And those that can't figure it out, or they balk at the natural boundaries, they're the troublemakers, the discontents, the bullies, and they're miserable. And they make everyone around them miserable as well. Because ultimately, we're talking about relationships. And humanity is inherently relational, as I'll mention a little bit later. And as those children grow, they either increase in their knowledge of the ways of peace, or they increase in their knowledge of the ways of war. And some just can't quite figure out how to be peaceful. And that's what governments ultimately are for. If everyone followed the golden rule, you wouldn't need a government. But unfortunately, we live in a fallen world. Going back to Spooner's idea that children learn the fundamental principles of natural law at an early age. I've talked about this before, this whole idea. And I referenced this essay because this is where Spooner most explicitly lays this out. Children learn the fundamental principles of natural law as infants, really. They begin that process. Like, they don't become experts in that. And how do they do that? What principles are they learning? Again, it's behavior within the context of relationship that leads to war or peace. And how are they learning this? Claire Cat says it's CDO. It must be in alphabetical order. I am OCD in some things. But then if you come and look at my garage workshop, you realize not in all things. How do the children learn natural law? Spooner writes, thus, they very early understand that one child must not, without just cause, strike or otherwise hurt another. That one child must not assume any arbitrary control or domination over another. That one child must not, either by force, deceit, or stealth, obtain possession of anything that belongs to another. That if one child commits any of these wrongs against another, it is not only the right of the injured child to resist and, if need be, punish the wrongdoer and compel him to make reparation, but that it is also the right and the moral duty of all other children and all other persons to assist the injured party in defending his rights and redressing his wrongs. Could any of these children give you a comprehensive thesis statement describing natural law? Probably not. But if you ask them questions, you can get them to describe that if one of their friends takes something that they had in their hands, they didn't like it. If one of their friends hits them for no reason, they don't like it. If they're playing a game and one of their friends keeps breaking the agreed upon rules, they don't like it. If they find out one of their friends has been telling them things that aren't true, they don't like it. If they find out their friends have been telling things about them to other children that aren't true, they don't like it. They may not understand why, they just understand that they do. They understand that when they and their friends don't do those things, but instead, played by agreed rules, tell each other things that are true, they don't take things from each other without showing respect and deference to each other, they find that their play is much more enjoyable. Everyone has more fun. Which someone might argue, well, that's not really speaking to a higher standard of law, except that when you understand what is being described as natural law, It's that which leads to peace or that which leads to war. So things are the way they are because that's the way God made it. Why do weather patterns work the way they do? Well, God made it that way. Eventually you get to that terminal principle, which we discussed in the Ether series. Clarkston B in the chat. Hey, brother. Good to see him at Deadwood as well. Had a nice truck ride over to the golf course that Thursday. Spooner writes, these are the fundamental principles of natural law which govern the most important transactions of man with man, that which he just described with the children, as far as not hitting, not stealing, not telling lies. It is inescapable that human beings, regardless of culture, are inherently transactional. And I would say we are that way because God is. Transactional is a more sterile way of saying that we are relational. This is, of course, connected with what I discovered with the ether and how it is the fingerprint of the Trinity as the primordial clay, the first step of creation, the closest to the hand of God in creation. What separates but also joins the persons of the Godhead and the Trinity is not their role, it's not their personalities, it's not their titles, but is their relationship to each other, which contributes to them being one. Not one and the same, because the Father is not the Son is not the Spirit, and so on. But they relate to one another in a way that always leads to peace. That is to say, it is always mutually beneficial, mutually honoring, mutually consensual relationship. We are made in God's image. So thus the society of man is also bound by relationship. And because God has given us ration and reason and powers of observation, we can identify the patterns of behavior that lead to a mutually beneficial relationship. We can recognize how consent and will factor in, and we can, like Jesus, defer to the other. Not my will, but thine be done. As I was thinking about this week, I realized this is a very important point. Within the Godhead, there's consent. Jesus was not forced onto the cross. Scripture tells us that he went to it deliberately and in full ownership of his consent. At any given point, he could have said no because he had the authority to say no. But for a higher purpose, he submitted himself willingly to the plans of the Father. Human consent in relationship between other humans is thus rooted deeply in the nature of God himself. It's not an invention of desperate men trying to find some angle against a tyrant. It is threaded into the very fabric of reality itself. Healthy, rightful, coherent human society will only ever be peaceful when we work in accordance with that reality. And this is the heart of the truth Spooner has uncovered and that we are uncovering together on this show. Maybe we should clip that one too. And while having written words to describe our social relationship, words that delineate the nature of the contract, the boundaries of the agreement, like the Constitution or something like that, that can be useful and helpful in the same way that any scientist seeking to understand the natural world will invent and define new terms, like Faraday coining the dielectric. The words, as Spooner so eloquently explained, do not create the ideas, but merely recall them. The words are meaningless without the ideas they are meant to recall. And the ideas are learned and understood long before we have the words, to recall them. Spooner writes, yet children learn them from earlier than they learn that 3 and 3 are 6 or 5 and 5, 10. Their childish plays even could not be carried on without a constant regard to them. And it is equally impossible for persons of any age to live together in peace on any other conditions. He goes on. It would be no extravagance to say that in most cases, if not in all, mankind at large, young and old, learn this natural law long before they have learned the meanings of the words by which we describe it. In truth, it would be impossible to make them understand the real meanings of the words if they did not first understand the nature of the thing itself. We teach children our words for colors by pointing to something of that color and saying blue, green, red, and the children begin to understand. We point to ourselves, we say daddy, mommy, and the baby learns to say dada and mama, which I was the first for my daughters saying dada rather than mama. I took that deep into my heart. But they know who dada or mama are long before they know how to say the words. When you enter the room and they get excited before they can speak. And that's in the same way that these young children know what truth is, what mine is, what yours is, what right is, what wrong is, long before they know the words we use to recall those things. Not in an eternal sense, not in some esoteric sense, not in some metaphysical sense, but in a sense that makes sense. How it relates to how we relate. This demonstrates the intertwined and inextricable nature of how we relate to one another is a reflection of and a demonstration of a continuation of how we relate to God. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. That's natural law. We demonstrate our love for God by our love for each other. This isn't just some lofty standard against which we will be judged, which we most certainly will. It's how God designed reality to function. And ultimately, as a reverberation of the way he relates with himself. So that down to the atom, and then up to the largest human society, following natural law, following nature seeking ground, which is ultimately what we're talking about here, is a participation in the nature of God himself. Not that we become God, but we get to participate in and glorify who God is. So if we're building a system, designing a government, operating a business, being a family, doing those things will always fail if we do them contrary to how God designed them to be. They're not different things. They're not special categories in which these meta rules do not apply. There's no such thing as individual prerogative and government prerogative. That is a distinction that is the short-lived refuge of tyrants. And everyone knows this to be true. They know it before they know the words to recall it. And as Spooner argues, they must know it before the words themselves can even make any sense. He writes, to make them understand the meanings, that is, children, to understand the meanings of the words justice and injustice before knowing the nature of the things themselves would be as impossible as it would be to make them understand the meanings of the words heat and cold, wet and dry, light and darkness, white and black, one and two, before knowing the nature of the things themselves. Men necessarily know sentiments and ideas no less than material things before they can know the meanings of the words by which we describe them. We know the word hot because we've been hot. People in the chat talking about it. We know the word cold because we've been cold. We know light because we have lived in darkness. And as we will discover in the coming weeks, we know justice because we know intrinsically that such a thing as justice must exist. And the next number of sections are going to be Spooner laying out a very thorough, logical framework for how we can declare that something like justice is an immutable concept. And it's a fascinating mental exercise, so I'm looking forward to going through that. That's all I've got for this evening. Thanks, everyone, for joining. I hope it was not too mentally burdensome. Texas Armadillo, love this show, Jay Drake. Well, thank you very much. I can always tell, I at least this is my impression of it, when chat kind of gets quiet, like people are trying to pay attention. At least that's what I flatter myself with. But anyway, I will bid you all adieu. John Harold is the guest on the narrative tonight. And with the recent intentions by a number of hosts to cut down on the on-stream swearing, it should only be about 45 minutes long. So we should all go over there and harass them. And I'll see you guys all next week. Take care.
Why a spoon, cousin? Why not an axe?
Because it's dull, you twit. It'll hurt more.
Thank you so much for joining us, and don't forget to hit the thumbs up on this video. And a special thank you to all of our advertising partners. Please remember to shift your dollars to support those businesses that support Badlands Media.